Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. February is a time that our state and country celebrates Black History Month. South Carolina has a tumultuous history when it comes to race relations, but where do we stand today? According to a recent Winthrop poll that was focused on race, there is still a very deep divide. In 2019, deep divides remain. The fight for racial equality continues in the halls of power of South Carolina to Main Street. Racism continues to be a top issue respondents care about, according to polls, and many South Carolinians want to see more action.
His work for social justice for all should serve as an incentive for us to remember our past, but continue to move us forward to make this a better place to live. We can't doze, not even for a brief period. We must always be vigilant and work to ensure equality and justice for all. Who would have thought these changes could have happened so quickly?
And I'm here
But days ago, the Black Legislative Caucus said enough isn't being done to promote diversity and protested after a vote that put a skilled white appellate lawyer on the Court of Appeals over a black female judge with 20 years on the bench.
A lot of applicants apply across the state, and this commission will determine who will come out. What I've seen is a lot of cronyism. That has to stop. My problem, and I said that to the General Assembly, the Joint Assembly, we have selected these judges based on political partisanship. That is wrong. It's wrong. We've got to figure out a way to fix it, and that's our task, and we're ready for it.
So you're saying race as well as political partisanship?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Joining us to dissect this complex issue is State Representative Justin Bamberg and Dr. John Dozier, Chief Diversity Officer at the University of South Carolina. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Gavin.
So, Representative Bamberg, I want to start with you, and both of you. I'm going to throw some numbers at you from this poll. It's a Winthrop poll of southern states that show there's still a deep divide amongst whites and blacks in the South. More than half of black Southerners report that they have been discriminated against in the past year because of their race, while 18% of white respondents have reported discrimination. And then otherwise, 51% of whites and 89% of black respondents said racial minorities were under attack. Representative Bamberg, do you feel like that is accurate in what we look at in South Carolina, when we look at race, when we look at racial equality? What do you think the state of racism, unfortunately, is in South Carolina right now?
I think that those numbers are in reality probably low, right? Because some of the minorities, for example, who may go through the most racism or the most bigotry, probably not the easiest people to get a hold of. People have got to remember that we aren't that far in time away from the bigger problems with race in this state. You know, as a biracial 31-year-old, my mom's white, my dad's black, when they first got out of the Army and came here in '91, where my dad's from, their marriage wasn't even recognized. So I was 12, 13 years old before their marriage was legal in this state. We were the 49th state to recognize interracial marriage. So we still do have racial issues here. You got black churches, you got white churches. You know, oftentimes the black kids at school hang out with the black kids and the white kids hang out with the white kids. So we're still working to have this concept of unity, which I think a lot of people do want, but racist habits and racist establishments take time to die off.
And is that something maybe we think, we're thinking back to the 60s, we've moved from the 60s onwards, but then you're sharing that story about just, interracial marriage, and that's even becoming more and more accepted, which is kind of an interesting concept to think about. Do we think that it's in the past and now it's time to move forward? Is it easier said than done, obviously, Doctor?
So thank you again for allowing us to be here today and especially addressing this important topic. I would say that, we have had now a generation, we're 2 or 3 generations now removed from the civil rights movement that happened a little over now 50 years ago. And we have to think about that in and of itself as context. I think that because we have young folks who are so far removed from that, many of them do in fact believe that we are in a post-racial environment, when I find that the challenges really are that we've not really addressed the issues of race. Yes, we had a civil rights movement. In one moment, you have discrimination as the law of the land. You have a movement where people are demanding equal access, equality in the ways that we are treated. And then you have immediately following now a law that protects legally discrimination. And while we have dealt with the legality of race, we've not dealt with the heart issues associated with race. We've not dealt with the pain and the history. And I find then that our students, we're in the middle of Black History Month, when these conversations about race are celebratory, we're all in. When the conversations about race deal with the painful histories of our past and ways that those painful histories are exhibiting themselves in today's context, those conversations are difficult. Our white students recoil from the conversations because either they don't want to have any kind of guilty feeling or admission for the sins of the past, or they may even be a little concerned about revealing what they understand about the world from their parents and their communities. Our Black students and Latino students recoil because they're just tired of engaging in this ongoing conversation about my identity or a central characteristic of my identity. And again, we as universities, schools very broadly, just don't do a good job at mediating this conversation and equipping our teachers to engage and engage fully.
And I definitely want to get more into education in a moment, but just kind of sticking with this poll, Representative Bamberg, do you feel that maybe racism now, is it more muted, is it more subtle, or is it somewhat still overt in ways, at least in South Carolina as you see it?
Depends on how you define overt, right? You're not gonna see anybody running around gang mobbing, beating people down in the street and be proud of it, right? But if you define overt in terms of systemic, in terms of access to opportunities, right? In terms of, day-to-day life for many minorities, I think right now we're at a pivotal point where Hispanics and other immigrants, for example, I think are facing discrimination much like African Americans did in the post-lynching era, so to speak. There's so much work to be done, but days like today where you actually sit down and talk about it, and just like he said, it's taboo to speak of when it's the uncomfortable aspects, right? But when it's the mother of manual and unity is important, and it's something that's so tragic that anyone with a conscience understands this was a racial problem and we need to be sticking together to get through this and heal, everybody's for it. But when the conversation is a little bit more uncomfortable, people tend to shy away. I remember my days here at USC, growing up in Bamberg, I come up here, and there were students who came, to the University of South Carolina that I knew who had never seen a Black person face to face before. That was 2005, right? And there are still people like that today, right? We live in a country where each area has its own individual characteristics. And I think some of the racism that is out there is still being passed down. But I do think that the young people of today, which gives me hope, they are more inclined to see through that and see past that and realize that the world is changing. And I think the biggest problems they get will be from their parents or their grandparents.
In terms of?
In terms of, it's not okay to date a Black guy, right? Or it's not okay to date a white girl or something like that. Whereas the young people, they want unity, right? They want to be able to sit down and hang out and do things without people saying like, "What are you doing hanging out with them?"
And Dr. Dozier, is that something you can see too? I mean, just being, 14 years removed from college and versus now in 2019, is that, at least your time in higher ed, is that something that you've maybe been seeing, you guys have been tracking in terms of broader acceptance and inclusivity when it comes to race, at least?
Yeah, so I agree with the sentiment. I mean, I think that our students indeed are far more open today than certainly when I was in college, for example, or when Representative Bamberg was in college, far more open to engaging across racial divides or other barriers of identity that exist. I think that students are open, yet at the same time, while students are open to the idea, I still think that there's a bit of a disconnect when it comes to really dealing with the real issues. So yes, I will have friends, and yet there might be times, difficult times, when my bias might come through in a conversation, and when that bias is exhibited, I don't know what to do with that. We don't know what to do with that when that happens, because things that are said, things that are done have consequence. And again, they reside in a place in our lexicon, in our history that we've not addressed.
Is it a matter of recognizing those moments and talking through those moments, or how do you maybe
Absolutely.
address those situations to
It's
improve?
it's recognizing those moments. I'm sorry to interrupt
No,
you.
it's
It is recognizing those moments. It's having the conversations. And might I add, and it's not up to the victim to be responsible for for educating his victimizer.
Okay.
It's for us as a university community to step in and create conditions on our university campus where everyone feels equally committed to stamping out racial intolerance or racial insensitivity, which is, again, maybe the better way of framing kind of what happens often today.
And Representative Bamberg, that poll also looked at, I want to get back to education in a minute, but that poll also looked at half of the black respondents said racial discrimination is the main reason that African Americans can't get ahead. Same amount of white respondents said black people are responsible for their own condition. So is it not understanding some of the barriers, some of the history, and how it's, like you were saying earlier, institutionalized in some regards? How do you break through and get through that discrimination as a means of holding people back?
Well, you've got to start at the beginning, which reality in America, in South Carolina being one of the first colonies, first states, is there's a group of people who started 400 years behind another group of people, okay? And that is, for example, land grants, right? If you trace some of these tracts of land and you go back to the original grant from the United States to X person, most of them were white, right? So you start behind. Now, do I personally believe that the problems with race that we're still dealing with stop you from exceeding in life? I don't. I think they make it a lot harder, right? You have to be better, right? And I went into the legal field where in America, 3% of attorneys are African Americans, right? If you look at the number of African American male lawyers in the country, it's even smaller, right? So there's this expectation that you're not as able as maybe your white counterpart, right? So no, it doesn't stop you, right? Only you can determine what's going to stop you, right? And just like I worked, it's possible, right? But it would be naive of anyone to look at the situation that we're dealing with and not understand and lend credence to those challenges, right? If you look at education, for example, look to my home area of Denmark, Bamberg, Denmark area, right, where you have 95+% African American town that still has school buildings from 60 years ago. And you expect those children to matriculate in that environment with the limited resources that we have because the state didn't do what it was supposed to do, and expect them to be able to be on the same playing field as the students from Lexington or the students who go to White Knoll or wherever, right? So it's an ongoing thing, and you've got to understand it. You can't let it stop you. But it does have an effect, and it does play have an impact on your ability to perform.
And looking at racial makeup, at least within the state and the University of South Carolina, I want to ask you, Dr. Dozier, South Carolina is 69% white, 27% black, African American. Is the goal of diversity at the University of South Carolina, as an example, to bring enrollment numbers up to kind of match that, and therefore get a better representation at the university to match the state? Is that the goal in some ways?
Absolutely, but Representative Bamberg kind of really underscores the challenge to that. Statistically, your zip code, where you grew up, is still statistically a determinant of your academic prowess, of your ability to make the SAT score and or get the grades and or kind of education that's going to prepare you for a University of South Carolina, Clemson, or any of our other selective enrollment institutions here in the state. And until we really address those more systemic issues, and it's not just about education, because education, again, is a social service. It's about adequate housing. It's about adequate resources or access to food, adequate access to healthcare, adequate access to a good paying job. All of that plays into one's ability to be well prepared for college. Yet, in the same light, I'll also recognize that there are many avenues to getting a college degree. And so that's why we have such a strong community college system, technical college system here in our state, as a pathway to get into the University of South Carolina. Yet we still have to address these more systemic issues because they're real.
And I would add, I'm a graduate of the University of South Carolina, as well as the University of South Carolina School of Law. And during my time here, I've seen the progress, right, that the university has made in terms of diversity programs, diversity initiatives, and that's important, right? And you can't underpraise the efforts, right? Because along with everything that's been talked about so far, the other aspect of being able to excel and perform is up here, right? And when you are one or two out of a class of 100, you feel isolated, right? You feel as though you stand out too much, and it makes you uncomfortable, right? And depending on other factors such as family or faith, right, or community support or school support, right, that can impact your performance, right? When you go to a school and you can count on one or two hands the number of people who look like you in a school that consists of, 600, 700, 800, 900 people, that does something to you, right? And it's not a good thing.
Well, that kind of goes back to what we saw in some of the reporting in the Post-Encouraged Minimally Adequate series that showed that there's still a lot of segregation, in schools in the country, in this state. 1 in 8 public schools is now intensely segregated, with 90% or more of the students as minorities. So, with education being a top priority in the legislature, is there a push to maybe redraw lines or to somehow combat this what they call de facto segregation at this point?
I think that the
infrastructure, like you were talking about?
Yeah, the focus in terms of dealing with education is first, it has taken way too long. You know, I matriculated through school while the Abbeville case was pending, and the Supreme Court didn't rule on it until I was already an elected official. So from kindergarten through Representative Bamberg, that case was pending, right? You know, and there's a fine balance between communities being able to choose what type of community they want to have in the state, than forcing those communities to be a certain way, right? Or we're going to make you all have one school and everybody's going to go to it because we want everybody to be unified, right? And then you got home rule issues, right? So, you know, I think that the bulk of South Carolinians want to get past this, and they realize we're at a point in time where it is inevitably going to happen, and you're either going to be left behind or you're going to be on the train moving forward. You know, so with education, we've got to understand that with resources, some areas need more resources than others. And a lot of times race plays a part in that because these depressed communities often may look a certain way.
Is there any credence to kind of switching to the political landscape, Dr. Dozier? You know, when we see what's going on in Virginia, the discussion about blackface, again, coming up over and over, you know, I think there was some numbers about just how many people in Virginia know someone or have actually been party to blackface. You know, I'm sure if we went through yearbooks in South Carolina institutions, they did in the Citadel, they saw some. I mean, it's still a pressing issue. Does that set us back, or does that bring this conversation back to the forefront again? And even though it's difficult because it is such a intense subject, does that keep the conversation going even though it's in some ways setting us back?
So again, it gets back to kind of something that I mentioned before. That's painful, and it's an uncomfortable conversation to be had because it is so entrenched in a history that we have, in many ways, failed to address through education, certainly, but socially, even more broadly. And so I feel very strongly that those incidents, while painful, also offer an opportunity for us to have that more serious conversation.
And that's something, obviously, that, you know, it's unfortunate we had to have that to prompt these discussions, but I mean, that's something that we even saw with Walter Scott, for example, a case that you were a part of, Representative Bamberg, helping with the family, the victim's family there. Is that something that have you seen us grow in South Carolina? Sorry to cut you off about that, but just we have a few moments left, but have we grown, you know, when it comes to at least law enforcement and you know, shootings and racism, perceived racism in South Carolina, in your opinion, from what you've seen? Because you've also been a part of cases in the Alton Sterling case in Louisiana. Is that shifting at all? I mean, we've seen numbers drop in terms of unarmed black men being shot by cops, but is there any idea, is there anything you can point to in terms of why that might be the case, and if we are moving forward, at least in the law enforcement realm?
I think that for the change that everyone desires to happen, it can't just be people that look like me and him fighting against it. We need people that look like you, right? Because folks that look like us have been fighting certain things for hundreds of years, right? I think that things are on the path to getting better, but it's not something that will be fixed overnight, right? It's going to take time, you know, and to fully be able to address, I think, racial problems in any particular area, whether it be education, whether it be law enforcement, we've also got to get past these things that are just in our face, like having statues of Pitchfork Ben Tillman proudly on the grounds of the South Carolina Capitol doesn't do a lot to help move the people of this state forward if we're going to have a frank discussion about unity, right? So again, it's systemic. And until you address the flaws in the system, are we really going to be able to expect individual people to easily be able to move forward together? And I think the answer to that is no.
If I can add very
Sure.
quickly, I think as I kind of look at what's going on, and I know too that I've been called into police departments to initiate conversations with the police departments about how they can be better members of their community and better serve the communities that they work in. And it takes very courageous officials to continue to engage police officers in this ongoing conversation. It can't just be a once and done kind of a training opportunity and then no more do we ever talk about it. It's an ongoing conversation, an ongoing realization that we exist together, that my success is tied to your success. And that's the way we move forward.
Which is 30 seconds left. Essentially, the takeaway for people wanting to move this conversation forward, this movement forward, is to have conversations, is to talk about what's going on and not feel worried about having those conversations, essentially.
I think it's talking honestly, allowing the space for you to make mistakes in the ways that you describe what you know and understand, and allowing me the space too to be able to engage where I feel comfortable.
We have so much more to talk about on this subject. I wish we could, but we have to get out. Thanks to Representative Bamberg and Dr. Dozier for being here today, and thank you for joining us. Also, check out the South Carolina Lead political podcast that you can find on your podcast app on any mobile device. Each week I recap the weekly political news with the journalists who cover it. From the Kennedy Greenhouse studio on the campus of the University of South Carolina, I'm Gavin Jackson.